Is it just me? Every time I say Scarborough Shoal, I start humming a Simon and Garfunkel song.
No.
Does your brain work the same way?
No. I'm not going to sing right now, but it's Scarborough Fair.
Yes.
But 100%. It's
Okay,
like
good.
the soundtrack of the last
Thank
couple
you.
of days of my assignment. You ready to get started?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Hi there. Welcome to Meanwhile in Asia. I'm Ivan Watson.
And I'm Christy Lou Stout, and I am super stoked to be here. Ivan, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of the show. I'm a fan of the journalism, and I am a fan of your podcast voice because it is like butter. It is smooth.
Thank you, Christy. For our viewers, Christy is the original Hong Kong anchor person, right?
Oh my goodness, the OG.
It's nice to be here. Thank you, Riz.
It's awesome to have you here at the table. And of course, you are helping contribute because our colleague and friend and co-host Kunal is on assignment in India right now.
Yeah, it's an honor to step in for Kunal to be part of this program. It's great.
You're part of the team, and we're going to hear more from him later on. With an update on the cockroach junta party and the drama there. But let's turn to the first order of business here, and that is the South China Sea, and China and the Philippines.
Yeah, China and the Philippines are clashing again in the Scarborough Shoal.
Basically, China wants almost all of it for itself. So we're asking this question right now: what if China will get what it wants, which is control of virtually all of this enormous body of water, the South China Sea?
Yeah, and what does it mean geopolitically? What does it mean economically? And you were able to witness one of these confrontations at sea in the Scarborough Shoal area, the South China Sea, with senior field producer Bex Wright. Shall we sing her praises?
Yeah, I've just spent a couple close days with Bex. We've been on ships together and boats,
Many.
I mean, she is not only intrepid and insightful, but she is also incredibly well-resourced and well-organized. I mean, you can be, any remote location. And if you need a contact, if you need an editorial line.
A hammock.
If you need a granola bar.
A blow-up pillow.
Oh, she's got you. Yeah, and Ivan and Bex, take us onto this ship. What was it like to be on this relatively small Philippines government, it was like a fishing department ship.
Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources.
The official title, facing the full power of China out in the open seas. What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, it's not very often that you get to be part of a moment like that, where something is unfolding all around you. And we have seen it before in a different part of the South China Sea. But this was, I think, the most up close and personal we have been, because our ship was actually water cannoned by one of the Chinese Coast Guard boats. And they came within 7 meters of our boat.
Wow.
Which, you're out on this great expanse of ocean, and when another vessel is that close to you, it's pretty scary.
And when it's twice the size of the little 30-meter ship that you're on that's kind of bobbing. Look, and these vessels, they're not going terribly fast. The top speed of the Philippine ship we were on was 10 knots per hour, which is like 11 miles per hour. It's not super fast. But the thing is, when you have these huge things that are tons and tons of like metal and steel, they don't stop on a dime. And when a giant ship kind of veers towards you, it's meant to be intimidating. And that's what we were witnessing firsthand and broadcasting live from the deck of this Philippine boat in the middle of the South China Sea.
Yeah, which is incredible to watch, by the way. Like, you have that potential for escalation and miscalculation.
Totally.
So when this confrontation is underway, how much communication is going on between these two ships?
They're
That's
doing the
interesting.
radio interactions, and they both sides seem to have a script that they read off, so it's the same thing each time. And the Chinese side was pretty agitated at points.
There was a Chinese radio operator whose voice was cracking, and then another one who's kind of yelling, and he had like a high tenor voice.
You have entered the justification the water of People's Republic of China.
Wow.
And then as the ship got closer to us and as the tensions escalated, the Chinese ship was using loudspeakers to warn us. And then shortly after that, the water cannons opened up. And the reason this was happening is the Philippine ships were trying to approach this place called the Scarborough Shoal. right? So basically a collection of coral reefs, or officially according to maritime law, an uninhabited rock that is only about 140 miles off of the main island of the Philippines and some 530 miles from the Chinese province of Hainan, right? But China has controlled it with its fleet of ships and says it belongs to China. And the warnings we were hearing was, this is the territory of the People's Republic of China. You have to leave.
And when you witness one of these confrontations, like the one that you saw the other day, how did it wind down? How did it resolve itself?
Well, essentially, the Filipino side, they decided to leave because they were trying to get as close to Scarborough Shoal as possible.
Yeah.
And then their mission was also to resupply some of their Philippine fishing boats. So on our ship, we had fuel and huge bags of rice. We had, piles of food that they were hoping to transfer to these ships because they're out there at sea for long periods of time.
Yeah.
But that essentially was abandoned in the end. So they turned around because of these water cannon incidents. And it happened multiple times. The same ship was circling us and hitting us each time. So I think from the Philippines' point of view, they wanted to get out of that area and de-escalate.
Yeah.
And that's officially what the Philippine commanders say, is our job is not to fire back with water cannons. It is to de-escalate because they're outmanned. All these Chinese ships are much larger than the Philippine ships.
Yeah.
The numbers of the Chinese ships. China has the world's largest navy, and we're not even talking about Coast Guard and maritime militia. So it dramatically outnumbers the Philippines when it comes to resources, the size of its economy. I mean, I've described this before as a David and Goliath style contest at sea. And this isn't the first one. Bex and I have been on other embarks, and we've witnessed these types of confrontations before, specifically between the Filipinos and the Chinese.
Yeah. The Philippines are outmanned, they're out-resourced. What was it like on the boat?
It was choppy. It was, but they looked after us pretty well. That would have been me.
I speak out of turn.
I don't like to show weakness, as you know, but that did happen. Luckily, it was on the way back, so we'd already shot everything.
And there was an approaching typhoon, so the seas were choppy. But I think you did say you literally fed the fish.
Yeah. Is that a Britishism? I don't know.
And how well were you fed on the boat? How were the ship rations?
Yeah, I mean, we brought all our own food, but actually they were, they were good hosts. They were feeding us at random times of the day because they're all working on shifts, right? They do a 4-hour shift. They take a break so that everybody remains fresh up on the bridge. They don't want to lose focus, especially when there's a confrontation. But every time you walk into the kitchen, somebody's eating because somebody's off shift.
It's a 17-person crew.
Yeah.
And I remember I once came down after you were kind of not feeling so hot to like knock on the door and say we were going to do something. And I saw something move in the corner, these stairs, and it was one of the crew members sleeping in a little hammock. And I couldn't believe how small this man had gotten. He was a little in this swinging hammock under a staircase inside in the bowels of this ship. Look, this is life at sea. These are folks who, especially the Bureau of Fisheries, they're supposed to be helping out this massive fishing fleet that more than 2 million people in the Philippines rely on fishing to feed their families.
Yeah.
It's a really essential part of the economy and part of why the Philippines, they say the issue of the South China Sea is partially food security, right? It's fish that they catch. These are areas, Scarborough Shoal was an area where fisher folk, as the government puts it, they used to operate. They used to be able to fish, and they've been blocked out by the Chinese for more than 2 years now. So that's one of the reasons why they refuse to give up their claim to this maritime domain.
And I think, the mission commander on the ship, who we're not allowed to name for security reasons, but
and he didn't show his face.
But he told us that it can be scary for the crew on these trips. They're up there, they don't know if they're going to have a real collision or if things are going to escalate. And the water cannon is pretty dangerous. They call it a code zebra. They bring everybody into the bridge for safety because they don't want a man overboard or anything like that to happen. But he also talked about how enthusiastic their crew is. They're all pretty young and passionate, and he
he's
says
in his 20s and in charge of like 4 ships.
But the way he describes it is he says, we really know our mission. We're here to protect our national sovereignty. And so I think they go through all this hardship, and it is their job. They're used to being at sea, but they are also quite mission-based, it was our impression.
I think it's important to kind of clarify what Beijing's argument is for why it says it should control the South China Sea.
Yeah, sure. This is what I've gathered to be China's stance on South China Sea. Like, China claims indisputable sovereignty to vast parts of the South China Sea, and China has ignored this 2016 International Court ruling that ruled against China and for the Philippines, saying that China had no legal basis for these historic claims to the South China Sea.
Not just in the Scarborough Shoal, but also in some of these other reefs and atolls and uninhabited rocks that China has occupied.
And clashing not just with the Philippines, but also with Malaysia, with Vietnam, with Brunei, with Taiwan. And this manifests in these confrontations at sea, and also the salami slicing, right? The so-called salami slicing, the taking a reef or a rock and building it up into an island and sticking runways and military installations on it. So why is China doing this? One, you talked about natural resources, seafood, fishing stocks. So that's food security there.
From Beijing's perspective, it makes strategic sense to want to control this whole body of water. Okay, it's good for your national security, right? You can protect your coastal cities from
it's a coastal buffer.
rival power like the U.S., which is the rival navy in the Pacific. To be fair, there are natural resources, right? Untold wealth that may be beneath the seabed,
like crude oil and natural gas.
Exactly, fishing. Stuff like that.
And also the shipping lanes itself. 1/3 of global shipping goes through the South China Sea. That is extremely valuable for China, and why China wants this. But last but not least is the projection of power. In practical terms, by putting out these installations in the middle of random sections of South China Sea, China can easily refuel its ships and planes beyond its own coast. And also its leader, Xi Jinping, can say, look, we are the power. We are the dominant authority here in the Indo-Pacific.
And one thing that the Coast Guard chief said to us, looking at the map, he talked about a strategic triangle where China's building up some of these atolls and reefs to be reclaimed islands where they can have military equipment and runways, etc. on there.
And this was after Xi Jinping promised Barack Obama during one of his terms that he would not militarize these man-made islands in the Spratly Islands.
But this triangle, they have an island in the Paracels, they have an island down in the Spratlys.
Several islands.
And several islands that they have done this building project, and the Scarborough Shoal one would complete that triangle. That's the Philippines' view, is that is extremely dangerous for the world if they complete their strategic triangle.
I spoke to the Rear Admiral Jay Terriella from the Philippines Coast Guard, who's been really a thorn in China's side, and he kind of engages in arguments online with the Chinese embassy in Manila. But I had an interview with him, and he explained some of the stakes for why the Philippines refuses to back down, even though it's clearly outgunned and out-resourced.
If we're going to allow China to continuously bully a smaller country like the Philippines, then probably next more countries in the region will also be, targeted by China, because nobody can ever be able to compete against their military power.
Yeah, and in terms of that bullying, and one of the fights that the Coast Guard chief has been having via Twitter usually, he has highlighted this AI video that was put out by Chinese state media, and that has been circulating, and it depicts the Philippines as a monkey. And Jay Terriella told us that this is racist, it's dehumanizing. He said racism has no place in our society anymore. And so he's sort of seeing that as how China perceives the Philippines. And that's why they feel like they have to stand up to it.
It's a bizarre video because it was released on English language state media.
And also it depicts the Philippines as a monkey that's being directed by the U.S. and Japan. And I might note, this wasn't our only trip. We have gone out on U.S. Navy flights over the South China Sea, on a Philippine Coast Guard embark in 2024. And I've heard interactions between China, the Chinese forces, and the U.S. crews. And then I've overheard interactions with Philippine air crews and ships. And I've noted a very difference in the tenor and, frankly, manners over the radio when the Chinese Coast Guard or Navy or whatever address U.S. Vessels and aircraft, and when they address the Filipinos, much less respect.
No, that's interesting. And then what about covering the story and the importance of covering the story now when the U.S. is distracted, when the U.S. is busy trying to figure out what's going to happen next in the war in the Middle East?
A couple points here. I think that the conflict in the Gulf and the Iranian closure of the Strait of Hormuz highlights how strategic waterways are.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the South China Sea, trillions of dollars worth of trade go through there. And if it was to be choked in the future in any way, it would have a huge impact on the global economy. That's one thing. Another thing is the U.S. Has a treaty with the Philippines, a mutual defense treaty. So theoretically, if something were to go terribly wrong in one of these confrontations, which happen almost monthly, and some Filipinos were killed, a ship was sunk, the U.S. would be treaty beholden, potentially, to come to the Philippines' defense against China.
Yeah.
And we're learning that they are moving closer to these allies, with Japan, the US, Australia. They are, buying more weaponry from these allies. The Filipinos are.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, not long ago, you witnessed in the air the interception by a Chinese jet.
I was on a U.S. Navy Poseidon, which was doing this kind of reconnaissance flight, and it flew all the way up over the Paracels, which is much closer to mainland China, and controlled by China. And lo and behold, next thing you knew, there was a Chinese fighter jet flying, close enough off of the wing of the American plane.
You are approaching Chinese airspace. Keep a safe distance or you'll be intercepted.
That I could clearly see the pilot, the Chinese pilot, with his kind of Top Gun-esque, helmet and visor looking around. And it was a jet that was armed with missiles. There was communication, very professional, between the two militaries, and nothing untoward happened. But he was shadowing the American plane and demonstrating that we are here, just as the Americans were demonstrating, well, we're here.
Yeah.
And I think that the firepower that China has already out in this region is worth a mention, because at one point with the Rear Admiral Jay Tariella, you asked him, can you win against China? And he was very honest. And he said, obviously we cannot win. And that's why he said, we need like-minded countries who believe in international law to be on our side in this fight. And last night, Monday, the President Marcos gave his State of the Nation address in Manila, his annual speech, and he referred to this crisis essentially, and he took a very strong line on this. He said, we are not greedy, we are not racists, we are not liars, we are respectful and we are dignified, we are Filipinos and we do not yield.
I've also heard the arguments from Beijing's perspective. When a U.S. Navy plane is flying that close to China, what is it doing there?
Yeah.
I've heard the argument, this is called the South China Sea.
Yeah.
Why should the U.S. be operating here? And its argument is, well, these are international waters.
Yeah.
Everybody's allowed to be here.
Yeah.
And we should point out that the Philippines calls it the West Philippine Sea.
Yes.
They
And
don't
everybody
call it
has
the
a different
South China
name.
Sea.
Yeah,
for the sea.
everything has a different. I mean, it's not Scarborough Shoal. It's Huangyan Island, right? The Chinese call it, in both in English and in Chinese.
Can I point something out that happened? As we got closer to Scarborough Shoal, right, we had our own Starlink that we were broadcasting on, and the Philippine ship had its own.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, both of them stopped operating.
Yeah.
Stopped getting data. And we got messages saying that it's restricted.
Said this is not available in your country.
Right.
Which suggests that Starlink thinks it is Chinese territory. And we have asked Starlink
We
for
don't know.
comment.
You sent an email
we will see.
in the last 24 hours seeking comment. Was China jamming Starlink, or does Starlink recognize China's claim to Scarborough Shoal? We don't know.
Yeah, we need to see that. This moment of time is interesting because of the soft power and perception game. Because China is kind of becoming cool again. There was a new State of Southeast Asia survey that came out earlier this year. And more countries in Southeast Asia are viewing China more favorably than the United States. But there is lingering mistrust over the issue of China's aggressive behavior in the South China Sea. So it was no surprise, I think, when a couple days ago, state-run media was playing up the video of these Chinese Coast Guard workers rescuing Vietnamese sailors off the Fiery Cross Reef, an area in the South China Sea, after their cargo ship had capsized and it sank. Because China is trying to project we're a friendly neighbor, we're responsible, but also we're in charge. Absolutely intentional messaging here.
Well, I'm glad to be back on dry land.
And what's the output? I mean, where are we going to see all the video, all the news gathering that you collected?
We are going to be working on, as soon as we finish this conversation, we'll be working on a short documentary where we bring all of this context into what we saw out on the ocean. And we will look back at some of our previous trips in different parts of the South China Sea. So that should be out later in August on CNN All Access.
And we have an article with video that went on CNN.com that I recommend everybody take a look at that, please.
Well done, team, and looking forward to seeing the documentary.
Hey, Christy, let's make a hard pivot right now, if that's okay. We're joined by Kunal Sehgal in New Delhi. You've been covering these protests, the Cockroach Junta Party. We had a whole episode about that a few weeks ago. Yep. Little did I did not expect it to kind of blow up the way it did. And it looks like they scored some major concessions from the Indian government.
Yeah, I mean, this was a major victory for the student movement, Ivan. Something, like you said, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he's not used to major concessions by opposition parties or opposition groups. So this was quite a big deal. And they've secured all of their demands, including the big one, the resignation of India's education minister. And we talked about this, I think, in our previous episode, where we were saying that they have a lot of online momentum, a lot of people following them on social media, but it's not really translating, on the streets. But guess what? It did. And I think there were two big moments in this movement. One was, when the prominent education activist Sonam Wangchuk, who had been on a hunger strike, joined the movement and was on a hunger strike with them. He was picked up by the Delhi police brazenly from the stage when he was on his 20th day of this hunger strike. And that really moved a lot of people here. I remember when I first came to Delhi, which is like 10 days ago, and I was in an Uber. I was talking to my Uber driver about what he thought about the student movement. And he was saying that, look, I mean, they're asking for education reforms. That's their right. But what they really got wrong was picking up this activist. He is so well respected in the country. So that really galvanized the movement. But then the other part where I think it just took to another level was on this particular Monday when they were attempting to march towards the parliament. And we saw scenes of extreme violence and clashes between the protesters and the police. And those scenes of the security personnel beating young protesters, some who were there for the first time. This was the first time they were attending any protest. Those scenes really resonated, and more people started showing up after that.
And Kunal, you were in the thick of it among the student protesters when the announcement went down that the education minister was stepping down. Could you give us a sense of just, exhilaration when that announcement came out?
Yeah, I mean, Christy, it was crazy. There were so many people. They were extremely happy. They were singing patriotic songs, and they were also just shouting slogans of victory. There was also some sense of shock, I guess, as well, because, again, they're not used to Modi conceding any ground. But there was also a bit of relief because they've been here for more than 30 days now, and they just felt really vindicated. There was a party going on in central Delhi till very late, and then finally the police had to like start saying to them, okay, all of your demands have been met. You guys need to leave now. Please just leave.
A fascinating account. And of course, there's also the issue of the challenge ahead. Even though there's these major concessions gained by the protest movement, major problems still persist. So this is a story to watch. Kunal, it's so cool to have you there. Great reporting. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for jumping in on your what was supposed to be your vacation to put on your journalist hat. And Kunal, this has given us an opportunity not only to have some on-the-ground reporting in this street drama in the Indian capital, but also to share the table here with Christy. And it's just been awesome. I can't wait to do something like this again with you, Christy.
It's
Thanks
been
for
a pleasure
coming
and privilege to be here. Kunal and Ivan, thank you. Big fan of Meanwhile. Keep up the great work.
Oh, thank you so much, Christy.
And that is it for our show. Thanks for watching. Please tune in again next week. See you later. Do you want to do a goodbye to your camera? Or
I think that was fine. I did
Okay.
the goodbye already.
all right.
Kunal, take care. Bye.
Awesome.